"You need to learn what real life looks like," he said. "Maybe then you'll grow up." I said nothing. I just nodded. But inside, something shattered. On our wedding night, she looked at me and whispered, "I know I'm not what you wanted." But she had no idea, and neither did my father, because what I did next, no one ever saw coming. The crystal tumbler shattered against the mahogany wall, sending shards of glass and amber liquid spraying across my father's prized first edition books. The silence that followed was deafening. My father didn't flinch, didn't even look at the destruction. His steel gray eyes remained fixed on mine, unfazed by my outburst. That's when I knew this wasn't a joke. "You can't be serious," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been more serious in my life, Ethan." My father's voice was calm, measured the same tone he used when closing 8-figure deals. "The arrangement has been made. The wedding is next Saturday." I laughed then, a hollow sound that echoed through his cavernous study. "This isn't the 18th century. You can't force people to marry." "I'm not forcing anyone," he replied, leaning back in his leather chair. "I'm offering a choice." The Bentley had purred beneath me just hours earlier as I sped through downtown, weaving between lanes with practiced ease. My phone had buzzed for the 5th time in 10 minutes, Father, again. I silenced it with a swipe, focusing instead on the rush of adrenaline as I pushed the car faster, my graduation gift becoming my escape vehicle. At 23, with an MBA I'd barely earned and a trust fund I treated like tap water, I existed in a bubble of my own making. Manhattan was my playground, and I its entitled prince. The third son of real estate mogul Victor Ellison had nothing to prove and everything to spend. Father had summoned me back to the family estate in Connecticut. Something about discussing my future and final chances. The same lecture repackaged in increasingly stern tones. I was 3 hours late already, and I didn't care. When I finally pulled into the circular driveway, the sun was setting. The family home, a sprawling colonial manor that had graced architectural magazines, loomed like a judge's bench. Maria, our housekeeper of 20 years, met me at the door with worried eyes. "He's been waiting since noon, Ethan," she whispered, taking my leather jacket. "In his study." I winked at her. "Then he can wait 10 more minutes while I get a drink." The bourbon burned pleasantly as I swirled it in a crystal tumbler, deliberately taking my time before sauntering to my father's study. I knocked once, not waiting for a response before pushing the door open. Victor Ellison sat behind his mahogany desk, silver hair perfectly coiffed, his expression carved from granite. The wall of windows behind him framed the estate gardens like a living portrait of wealth. This was his power. Pose the setting designed to remind visitors and family alike of their place in his world. 3 hours and 26 minutes late, he said without looking up from the document he was signing. "Sit down." I sprawled into the leather chair across from him, bourbon still in hand. Traffic was terrible. You know how it is. He finally looked up, his steel gray eyes meeting mine. There was something different in them today, not just the usual disappointment, but a cold finality I'd never seen before. "Your brother called from Tokyo this morning. The merger is complete. $8 billion. He worked 18-hour days for 6 months to make it happen." He slid a folder across the desk. "Your sister's charitable foundation just received another award for her work with homeless youth in the Bronx." "Congratulations to the Golden Children," I said, not bothering to open the folder. "Is this why you called me here? To remind me I'm the family disappointment?" "No, Ethan. I called you here because it ends today." He stood, walking to the window. "The DUI last month was your third. The model who overdosed in your apartment that makes 4 scandals this year alone. The money you invested in your friend's ridiculous startup is gone. Your trust fund is hemorrhaging cash. I drained my glass. And I'm done. You've had every advantage, every opportunity. Private schools, Ivy League education, connections most people would kill for. And you've squandered all of it. If this is about money, it's not about money. For the first time, his voice rose. It's about you becoming an actual human being instead of this parasite I've created. The word stung more than I expected. I stood, ready to leave, but he continued. Sit down. We're not finished. Something in his tone made me comply. He returned to his desk, pressing an intercom button. Send her in. The door opened, and she entered. A young woman, perhaps my age or a few years younger. She wore a simple blue dress, clean but visibly worn at the edges. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing that screamed money or status. This is Elena Morales, my father said. She nodded slightly, her eyes darting between us, before settling somewhere near my father's desk too, intimidated to make eye contact. Ms. Morales works 3 jobs to support her younger siblings after their parents were deported last year. She cleans offices at night, works at a diner in the mornings, and on weekends, helps at the shelter where your sister volunteers. I stared at him, uncomprehending. And I should care because you're going to marry her. Next week. That's when the glass had left my hand, shattering against the wall. The silence that followed my outburst lasted only seconds before my father continued, as if nothing had happened. As I was saying, the wedding is next Saturday. Small ceremony, just family and necessary witnesses. This is insane, I said, pacing now. You've finally lost your mind. Elena remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the floor. Her stillness infuriated me further. Do you have nothing to say? I demanded, turning to her. Are you just going to stand there while he arranges your life like it's a business deal? She finally looked up, meeting my gaze directly for the first time. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and surprisingly defiant. Your father has offered to expedite my siblings' citizenship process and provide funding for their education, she said, her voice softer than I expected, but steady. In exchange for 1 year of marriage to you. She paused. I've agreed to his terms. I turned back to my father, incredulous. And what do you get out of this sick arrangement, besides the satisfaction of humiliating me? What I get, he said, his voice suddenly tired, is one last chance to save you from yourself. He sat down heavily. Marry Elena. Live on a budget I determine. Work an actual job that I will arrange, and prove to me over the course of 1 year that you can be a decent human being or be cut off entirely. No money, no connections, no family name to trade on. Your choice. I laughed bitterly. Some choice. It's more choice than most people get in this world, he replied. Just ask your bride-to-be. Elena's expression remained neutral, but I saw something flicker in her eyes, resentment, perhaps, at being used as an object lesson. And if I refuse, then you leave this house with the clothes on your back and the contents of your wallet. Your accounts will be frozen, your car repossessed, your credit cards canceled. Your name will mean nothing because I'll make sure everyone in our circle knows you're on your own. The threat hung in the air between us. For the first time in my life, I felt truly cornered. You're bluffing, I said, but without conviction. He slid another document across the desk. Try me. I snatched the paper's legal documents prepared by the family attorneys, detailing exactly what being cut off would mean. It was comprehensive, brutal, and absolutely binding. This is insane, I repeated, tossing the document back onto his desk. You can't possibly think this will work. What I think, my father said, leaning forward, is that you've never faced real consequences in your entire life. You've never had to work for anything. You've never had to consider anyone but yourself. He gestured to Elena. You need to learn what real life looks like. Maybe then you'll grow up. The words hit me like physical blows, not because they were cruel, but because some small part of me recognized their truth. I'll give you until morning to decide, he said, dismissing me with a wave. Ms. Morales will be staying in the guest room tonight. I stormed out without another word, slamming the door behind me. Hours later, I found myself on the terrace, nursing a bottle of scotch I'd liberated from my father's collection. The night was clear, stars visible in a way they never were in the city. The same stars I'd looked at as a child, when things were simpler. May I join you? I turned to find Elena standing hesitantly by the French doors. She'd changed into more casual clothes jeans and a simple sweater that somehow made her look even more out of place in this setting of wealth and privilege. Free country, I muttered, gesturing vaguely to the empty chair beside me. She sat down carefully, as if afraid the antique furniture might break under her weight. We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. I don't want this either, she finally said. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Without the nervous deference she'd shown in my father's study, she seemed different, more substantial somehow. Her profile was illuminated by the soft terrace lights, revealing a quiet dignity I hadn't noticed before. Then why agree to it? I asked. You know why. She turned to face me. My brother is 16. My sisters are 14 and 12. After our parents were deported, I became their only support. The only thing keeping them from foster care or worse. So you'd marry a stranger? I'd do anything for them. The simplicity of her statement hung in the air between us. Wouldn't you? For family? I had no answer. The truth was, I'd never been tested that way. I'd never had to sacrifice anything for anyone. How did my father find you, anyway? Through your sister's foundation. I was applying for educational assistance for my siblings. Somehow he heard about our situation. She paused. He said I reminded him of someone. Who? Himself, when he was young. I laughed harshly. Victor Ellison, man of the people? Trust me, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, just like the rest of us. Elena shook her head. That's not what he told me. He said he grew up poor in Queens, that he worked 3 jobs to put himself through college. I stared at her, certain she was lying. My father, the titan of Manhattan real estate, came from old money. Everyone knew that. It was part of the Ellison myth. He's manipulating you, I said. It's what he does. She shrugged. Maybe. But the help he's offering my siblings is real. The citizenship paperwork has already started moving through the system. My brother has been accepted to a private high school for the fall, with a full scholarship. I took another swig of scotch, feeling the burn all the way down. So you get your siblings' future secured, and I get... What? A year of playing house with a stranger to please my father? You get to keep your privileged life, she said with unexpected sharpness, after a year of minor inconvenience. Minor inconvenience? I laughed. You have no idea what my life is like. And you have no idea what real struggle is, she countered, standing up. I work 18 hours a day, and I still can't afford proper health insurance for my siblings. I haven't slept more than 5 hours a night in over a year. So forgive me if I don't sympathize with your hardship of having to temporarily live like an ordinary person. She turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth, I don't think your father's plan will work. People like you don't change. With that, she left me alone with the stars and my thoughts. I didn't sleep that night. I paced my childhood bedroom, weighing my options. I considered running. I had friends in Europe, connections my father couldn't reach. But realistically, how long would I last without access to my funds? I had no marketable skills, no experience living on a budget. The thought of actual poverty, of true struggle, was terrifying. By dawn, I'd made my decision, not because I believed in my father's twisted social experiment, but because I had no real choice. 1 year. I could endure anything for a year. When I entered the breakfast room, my father was already there, calmly reading the financial section of the newspaper. Elena sat across from him, looking exhausted. "I'll do it," I said without preamble. My father looked up, his expression unreadable. "You're making the right decision. Let's be clear, I'm doing this because you've backed me into a corner, not because I believe in whatever lesson you're trying to teach me." He nodded. "Your motivations are irrelevant. It's the experience that matters." Elena remained silent, pushing egg whites around her plate. "So what now?" I asked, dropping into a chair. "We just announced to the world that I'm marrying the housekeeper? No offense," I added belatedly to Elena, who responded with a cold stare. "Miss Morales is not a housekeeper," my father corrected. "She's a hard-working young woman trying to support her family, something you would know nothing about." He folded his newspaper precisely. "As for the world, they'll think whatever we tell them. A private romance, a whirlwind courtship. People love a Cinderella story. And how exactly is this charade supposed to work? Where will we live? What about my life in the city? You'll live in the guest house on the property. Your life in the city, as you call it, is over for now. You'll work at your sister's foundation, in their homeless outreach program. Minimum wage, standard hours. You can't be serious." "Deadly serious." He turned to Elena. "Ms. Morales, I understand from our previous discussion that you'd prefer to continue your current employment?" She nodded. "The schedule works with caring for my siblings." "Very well. After the wedding, arrangements will be made to bring your family here. They'll be enrolled in local schools." I gaped at him. "They're all moving in too?" "Not to the guest house. They'll have apartments near the schools, but yes, they'll be nearby." His tone suggested this point was non-negotiable. "You'll have a monthly budget for household expenses, modest but adequate. Any purchases beyond that require my approval." "This is indentured servitude," I muttered. "No, Ethan," my father said, standing. "This is life for most of the world. It's about time you experienced it." The week that followed was a blur of surreal preparations. My father's executive assistant handled most of the arrangements, a simple ceremony at the family chapel, a small reception afterward. My bank accounts were transferred to a new monitored account with strict limits. My credit cards were canceled, replaced with a single card with a modest limit. My mother, returning from her latest European spa retreat, was predictably horrified. "Victor, you cannot be serious about this," she exclaimed when he informed her of the plan. "The boy needs discipline, not some melodramatic lesson about poverty. What will people say?" "They'll say he's finally growing up," my father replied. "Or they'll say nothing because it's not their business." My brother, calling from Tokyo, was more amused than concerned. "You're actually going through with this?" he asked, laughter in his voice. "I half expected you to be in Monte Carlo by now, living off your poker winnings. Not all of us can escape the old man's grip," I replied bitterly. "Look, it's 1 year. Play along, learn to budget, like the common folk, and then go back to your regularly scheduled debauchery. How hard can it be?" My sister, Catherine, had a different reaction when she visited the house 2 days before the wedding. She found me in the library, staring blankly at a shelf of books I'd never read. "I met her, you know," she said without preamble. "Elena, She's been volunteering at the foundation for months. I turned to face my older sister, the family saint, with her perfect record of achievement and philanthropy. Let me guess, you think this whole arrangement is a wonderful idea? Catherine sighed, settling into an armchair. I think it's extreme, even for Dad, but I understand his desperation. Desperation? He's Victor Ellison. He doesn't do desperate. You've been spiraling for years, Ethan. The DUIs, the scandals, the money wasted. He's tried everything else, counseling, tough love, enabling. Nothing's worked. She leaned forward. I'm worried about you too, you know. Her sincerity caught me off guard. Catherine and I had never been close, separated as we were by her perfection and my rebellion. I don't need saving, I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Elena is remarkable, she continued as if I hadn't spoken. Do you know what she's overcome? Her parents were professors in Guatemala before the political situation forced them to flee. They lived here for 15 years, building a life, raising their children, paying taxes. Then a paperwork error during a routine visa renewal and they were deported. Elena was in college when it happened. So she dropped out to care for her siblings. I finished, remembering what my father had said. She had a full scholarship to NYU, was studying international relations, wanted to work in human rights law. Catherine shook her head. Instead, she cleans offices and serves breakfast to pay rent, and still finds time to volunteer at the foundation because she believes in helping others. The contrast with my own wasted privileges wasn't lost on me. Dad told you to tell me all this, didn't he? Part of his grand plan to reform the family screw-up. Dad doesn't tell me what to do, Catherine said sharply. I'm telling you because I know there's more to you than this selfish, entitled persona you've been hiding behind. And because Elena deserves better than being treated like a punishment. She stood to leave, then paused by the door. One more thing, Elena doesn't know I've told you this, and she'd probably be mortified if she knew. She has too much pride. But remember it when you're feeling sorry for yourself in your hardship of living in a luxury guest house on a restricted budget. Catherine's words stayed with me, unsettling something deep inside. The narrative I'd constructed poor little rich boy forced into an arranged marriage as punishment suddenly seemed pathetically self-centered. The night before the wedding, I found myself driving aimlessly through town in my soon-to-be repossessed Bentley. I ended up at a dive bar on the edge of the Counteith, kind of place no one would recognize in Ellison. I was 3 bourbons in when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It's Elena. Your father gave me your number. Can we talk? I stared at the screen, contemplating, ignoring it. But curiosity won out. I'm at O'Malley's, edge of town. 30 minutes later, she walked in. She looked different outside the rarefied air of the Ellison estate, more at ease in worn jeans and a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. She spotted me and made her way through the sparse late-night crowd. I'm surprised you came, I said as she slid into the booth across from me. I almost didn't. She declined the bartender's offer of a drink with a shake of her head. I thought we should talk, alone, without your father orchestrating everything. What's left to discuss? The arrangement's been made. The chains are ready to be locked tomorrow. She flinched slightly at my tone. I wanted to be clear about something. This marriage, it's a business arrangement. I know that. I'm not expecting anything from you beyond what your father outlined. Meaning? Meaning no pretense of romance, no expectations of anything physical. She met my eyes steadily. We live together, we maintain appearances in public, we fulfill the terms of the agreement, that's all. I found myself oddly relieved, and, strangely, a little offended. Don't worry, forced marriage doesn't exactly put me in a romantic mood. Good. We understand each other." She stood to leave, then hesitated. "One more thing. My siblings, they don't know this is arranged. They think it's real. I'd like to keep it that way." "You want me to pretend to be in love with you in front of your family?" I asked incredulously. "No, just don't be cruel. Don't make them feel like they're burdens or that their presence in your life is unwanted. They've been through enough." There was something in her voice, a fierce protectiveness, that made me nod despite myself. "Fine. I won't traumatize the children. Anything else?" "Yes." She leaned forward, her expression hardening. "If you humiliate me or do anything to endanger this arrangement, I will make your life extremely unpleasant. I've agreed to this for my family's sake, but I'm not a doormat." For the first time, I saw real fire in her, not just quiet dignity, but a steel core of determination. It was surprisingly impressive. "Noted," I said, raising my glass in a mock toast. "To the most romantic night before the wedding in history." She didn't smile as she turned to leave. "See you at the altar, Mr. Ellison." The wedding day dawned clear and cool. I dressed mechanically in the custom suit my father's assistant had ordered, my last taste of luxury for the foreseeable future, I supposed. My reflection in the mirror showed a stranger, designer clothes wrapping a hollow shell, hungover and trapped. The family chapel was sparsely filled. My mother sat rigid in the front row, a frozen smile plastered on her face for the few family friends who'd been invited. My brother had flown in from Tokyo, looking vaguely amused by the whole spectacle. Catherine sat beside a small group of younger people who must have been Elena's siblings, 3 dark-haired, solemn-faced teenagers watching the proceedings with wide eyes. Elena wore a simple white dress that had probably come from a department store. No veil, no elaborate train, just a single strand of pearls that I later learned had been her mother's. She was beautiful in an understated way, and the thought caught me off guard. The ceremony was brief, the words mechanical. "I do," fell from my lips like stones, heavy and final. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, there was no kiss, just an awkward moment where we both realized the expectation and mutually decided to ignore it. The reception was equally strained. My mother made polite, condescending conversation with Elena's siblings. My father watched it all with the satisfied air of a chess master whose gambit had been accepted. I drank steadily but carefully, aware that a scene would only make things worse. Elena moved through the room with surprising grace, thanking guests, ensuring her siblings were comfortable, playing the role of the happy bride with a conviction I couldn't muster. Only once did I catch her expression falter when one of my mother's friends asked about her parents and why they weren't present. The flash of pain across her face was quickly masked, but it left me feeling unexpectedly protective. "They couldn't be here," I interjected, stepping to her side. "Family emergency in Guatemala." The friend made sympathetic noises and moved on. Elena looked at me with surprise. "Thank you," she said quietly. I shrugged. Seemed easier than explaining immigration law to Bitsy Vandermeer. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was the most genuine interaction we'd had. As the reception wound down, my father approached us where we stood in awkward silence by the terrace doors. "The guest house is ready," he said. "Maria has stocked the basics. You'll find your new bank cards on the counter, along with the keys to your new car." "New car?" I asked warily. "A Toyota Camry. Practical, reliable, excellent safety rating." He seemed to relish my wince. "Your Bentley has been sent to auction. The proceeds will go to Catherine's foundation." Of course they would. "Your first day of work is Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. Denise Watkins will be your supervisor. She's expecting you." He turned to Elena. "The citizenship paperwork for your brother is proceeding well. He should have his green card within 6 months." "Thank you, Mr. Ellison," she said formally. "Victor, please, we're family now." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I expect weekly dinners, Sunday evenings at the main house, to check on your progress." With that ominous pronouncement, he left us to begin our fake marriage in earnest. The guest house was a cruel joke here. Modest 3-bedroom cottage on the estate grounds that was meant to teach me humility while still being nicer than anywhere most people would ever live. Full kitchen, living room with a fireplace, office space, and a master suite that immediately presented an awkward question neither of us wanted to address. Elena solved it with typical practicality. "I'll take the second bedroom," she said, setting down her single suitcase. "The master suite has the better closet for your things." I nodded, relieved and strangely disappointed. She began unpacking methodically, her few possessions barely filling one drawer of the dresser. I wandered through the house, opening cabinets, examining our modest accommodations with the detached curiosity of a tourist. The refrigerator was stocked with basic groceries' actual ingredients rather than prepared foods. The bar cabinet, unsurprisingly, was empty. The closet in the master bedroom contained a new wardrobe for me department store clothes in my size, practical and utterly devoid of designer labels. "My father thinks of everything," I muttered. "He's determined," Elena agreed, appearing in the doorway. "But so am I, and I assume so are you." I turned to face her. "What does that mean?" "It means we both have goals from this arrangement. Mine is securing my family's future. Yours is enduring the year to regain your trust fund. Neither requires us to be enemies." "So what are you suggesting? A truce?" "I'm suggesting we make the best of it. Be cordial, respect each other's space, and remember that this is temporary." She stood there in her simple dress, her wedding dress, looking impossibly young and old at the same time. Burdened with responsibilities no 20-something should have to bear, yet facing them with a composure I couldn't imagine possessing. "Fine," I said. "Cordial roommates it is." She nodded, satisfied, and turned to leave. As she reached the door, she paused. "Your father may be wrong about many things, but he's right about one. You have been given every advantage in life. What you do with that is your choice, but pretending you're a victim doesn't suit you." Before I could respond, she was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and an unfamiliar feeling that might have been shame. That night, after an awkward dinner of sandwiches, neither of us felt like cooking. We retreated to our separate bedrooms. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of this strange new prison, cataloging the wreckage of my life. No access to my usual funds, no apartment in the city, no car worth driving. No freedom to pursue the pleasures I'd built my identity around. And a wife, a stranger who had seen through my carefully constructed facade of indifference with disturbing ease. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through unfamiliar curtains. I stumbled to the kitchen to find Elena already dressed, making coffee. "Good morning," she said neutrally, sliding a mug across the counter. I grunted a response, accepting the coffee with the desperation of the hungover. "I need to go into the city today," she said. "Sunday shift at the diner. I'll be back around 4. Your father mentioned something about dinner at the main house tonight." "Right. The weekly inspection." I sighed, leaning against the counter. "Need a ride to the train?" She looked surprised at the offer. "That would be helpful, actually. My usual bus doesn't run on Sundays." 20 minutes later, I was behind the wheel of the most aggressively average car I'd ever driven, taking my fake wife to the train station. The absurdity of the situation hit me anew. "This is insane," I said as we crawled through weekend traffic. "My father has actually lost his mind." "Maybe," Elena conceded. Or maybe he's desperate. For what? To control me? To save you, she said simply. I laughed harshly. I don't need saving. She didn't argue, just looked out the window. After a moment, she said, When my parents were deported, I thought it was the end of the world. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd planned gone overnight. I had to drop out of school, find multiple jobs, become a parent to my siblings. She turned to face me. But it taught me something. We're all stronger than we think. When everything is taken away, you find out who you really are. And who am I? In your expert psychological assessment, I asked sarcastically. I have no idea, she replied honestly. You hide behind so many layers of privilege and practiced indifference, I doubt even you know anymore. Her words stung with their accuracy. We reached the station in silence. As she gathered her bag to exit the car, I found myself asking, Why did you agree to this? Really? There must have been other ways to help your siblings. She paused, hand on the door handle. Do you know how many undocumented families are separated each year? How many children end up in the system, or worse? How impossible it is to navigate immigration without money and connections? She shook her head. Your father offered a certainty no one else could. A guarantee that my family stays together, that my siblings get education and opportunities. She met my eyes. Wouldn't you do the same? For family? It was the second time she'd asked me that question. I still had no answer. See you at 4, she said, closing the door behind her. I drove back to the guest house slowly, mulling over her words. What would I do for family? The truth was, I'd never had to make sacrifices for anyone. My life had been a long exercise in self-indulgence, enabled by my father's money and insulated from real consequences. The guest house felt emptier without Elena's quiet presence. I wandered from room to room, at loose ends without my usual weekend distractions. No brunches with models, no VIP lounges, no shopping sprees to fill the emptiness. On a whim, I checked the car's glove compartment and was surprised to find a small flask, clearly an oversight in my father's sanitizing of my environment. I took a grateful swig of the cheap whiskey, then decided to explore the grounds. If this was to be my prison for a year, I might as well know its boundaries. The estate spread over 30 acres, most of it meticulously landscaped. I walked aimlessly, eventually finding myself near the old boathouse by the small lake. It had been my refuge as a teenager, a place to smoke stolen cigarettes and later to bring girls away from the main house. To my surprise, it was unlocked. Inside, everything was exactly as I remembered: the worn couch, the mini fridge, the stack of ancient magazines. Someone had maintained it, despite years of disuse. I settled onto the couch, flask in hand, and let memories wash over me. I remembered being 16, hiding here after a brutal fight with my father over grades. Catherine had found me, bringing a peace offering of sandwiches and quiet understanding. He's hardest on you because he sees himself in you, she'd said. I dismissed it as platitude then. Elena's words from earlier echoed in my mind. Your father offered a certainty no one else could. What certainty was he offering me with this bizarre arrangement? What was he really trying to accomplish? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Carlos, Elena's brother. She gave me your number. Are you picking her up from the train, or should I? I stared at the message, momentarily confused. Then I remembered her siblings, part of the package deal. The children I'd promised not to traumatize. I'll get her, I texted back. 4 p.m. train? 4:17. She always takes the 3:45 from Grand Central. Thanks, man. The casual thanks, man, from this stranger, this teenager who was now supposedly my brother-in-law, struck me as surreal. I checked my watch, just enough time to sober up and make it to the station. Elena looked exhausted when she stepped off the train, her uniform partially visible under her coat. She seemed surprised to see me waiting. "Carlos texted," I explained. "Said you'd be on this train." "That wasn't necessary," she said, but the relief in her eyes suggested otherwise. "Rough day?" I asked as we walked to the car. "Sunday brunch crowd. Rich people who think 15% is generous when they've run you ragged for 2 hours." She sighed. "Sorry, that was accurate?" I supplied with a wry smile. "I've been that guy, I'm sure." "Probably," she agreed, but there was no judgment in her tone, just fatigue. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the road. Elena stared out the window, her expression unreadable. "My siblings are excited to meet you properly," she finally said. "They only saw you briefly at the wedding reception." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "What exactly have you told them about me? About us?" "Just that we met through your sister's foundation. That we connected." She chose the word carefully. "They know it was a quick courtship. They don't need to know it wasn't real. And what am I supposed to say when they ask how we fell in love?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Elena turned to look at me directly. "You're a creative person when it comes to storytelling, I imagine. All those excuses to your father over the years must have required some talent." I had to acknowledge the hit with a grudging nod. "Fair enough. They'll be moving into their apartment next weekend," she continued. "It's closer to their new schools. Your father's assistant arranged everything." "Of course she did," I muttered. My father's special talent rearranging lives without consent. "Some people would be grateful for that kind of help," Elena said quietly. "I'm not some people." Clearly. We lapsed back into silence, but something had shifted. The air between us felt charged, not with attraction, but with a mutual assessment, two strangers taking the measure of each other, calculating how to survive this forced intimacy. When we reached the guest house, Elena immediately headed for the shower. I found myself at loose ends again, anxious about the impending dinner with my father. I checked my phonino messages from my usual crowd. Word had obviously spread that Ethan Ellison was on lockdown. Fair weather friends indeed. I changed into the least offensive of my new department store clothes chinos and a button-down that hung wrong on my frame, accustomed as I was to bespoke tailoring. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked ordinary. The thought was unsettling. Elena emerged looking transformed. Her work weariness had been washed away, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She wore a simple green dress that brought out flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Nothing designer, nothing flashy, but undeniably lovely. "You clean up well," I said, the compliment slipping out before I could stop it. She looked surprised, then guarded. "Is that appropriate to say to your fake wife?" "Probably not," I admitted. "But it's true nonetheless. My mother's friends will be less condescending this time." "I don't care what your mother's friends think," she said, but a slight blush belied her words. "Well, you should," I said, surprising myself. "They're vipers. They'll be watching our every move, looking for signs that this marriage is a sham, reporting back to their social circle. My father may be a control freak, but my mother lives and dies by appearances." Elena considered this. "So we need to be convincing, for both our sakes." "Precisely. What does that entail exactly?" I gestured vaguely, looking at each other occasionally, not flinching if our hands touch. Basic newlywed behavior without the physical aspects. She nodded slowly. "I can do that. For my siblings' sake." And for my trust fund? I added with a wry smile. For the first time, she laughed a genuine sound that transformed her face. We're quite the pair, aren't we? Each using this bizarre situation for our own ends. A marriage of convenience in the 20th century. My father really is old-fashioned. When we arrived at the main house, my mother was already holding court in the drawing room, cocktail in hand. Catherine and my brother James were there, along with my Aunt Vivian, me, mother's sister and chief gossip distributor. Ah, the newlyweds, my mother said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Elena, darling, that dress is quaint. I felt Elena stiffen beside me. Without thinking, I placed my hand at the small of her back, a gesture of solidarity and apology for my mother's thinly veiled insult. I think she looks beautiful, I said, surprising everyone, myself included. My mother's eyebrows rose slightly. Well, of course she does. I simply meant the style is so refreshingly simple. Elena relaxed slightly under my touch. Thank you, Mrs. Ellison. I believe in quality over labels. My brother choked on his drink, poorly disguising a laugh. Catherine shot me an approving glance. Where's father? I asked, changing the subject. In his study on a call with Tokyo, James replied. Market crisis or something. He'll join us shortly. My mother turned her attention to me. Ethan, darling, Vivian was just asking about your honeymoon plans. I told her you're postponing travel until Elena's siblings are settled. The implication was clear. Surely this marriage wasn't permanent enough to warrant an actual honeymoon. Actually, I heard myself saying, we're thinking of a weekend in Vermont when the fall colors peak. Elena loves nature, and I'm learning to appreciate life's simpler pleasures. Where'd that come from? Elena glanced at me with barely concealed surprise. How rustic, my Aunt Vivian said with a smirk. I remember when your father took your mother to Monaco for 3 weeks after their wedding. The Ellison men have always had a flair for the grand gesture. Times change, I said flatly. So do people. Do they? My father's voice came from the doorway. He stood watching us, his expression unreadable. Dinner is ready. We moved to the formal dining room in uncomfortable silence. I found myself automatically pulling out Elena's chair, a gesture of ingrained etiquette that seemed to surprise her. Thank you, she murmured. Dinner was an exercise in strained politeness. My mother made pointed inquiries about Elena's charming siblings and their education. My aunt mentioned friends whose housekeeper had been deported, wondering aloud if Elena knew them. James talked business with my father, pointedly excluding me from the conversation. Through it all, Elena maintained a quiet dignity that I found increasingly admirable. She answered questions directly but volunteered nothing, giving my family's snide curiosity no purchase. Elena, my father said during a lull in conversation, I understand you were studying international relations before your family situation changed. She nodded, looking wary. Yes, at NYU. A pity you couldn't continue. The world needs more intelligent people in diplomacy. He turned to me. Wouldn't you agree, Ethan? I recognized the trap immediately. Agree too enthusiastically, and I'd highlight how my privilege had allowed me to squander educational opportunities Elena had lost. Disagree, and I'd insult my new wife. I think people find their way to their true calling eventually, I said carefully. Sometimes through unexpected paths. My father's eyebrows rose slightly, perhaps surprised I hadn't fallen into his verbal snare. Indeed, he said. Speaking of callings, how are you finding your preparations for tomorrow's start at the foundation? Illuminating, I replied, matching his neutral tone. I've been reviewing their programs. The outreach work is more extensive than I realized. Catherine looked surprised at my apparent knowledge. In truth, I'd glanced at the Foundation's website for 5 minutes before coming to dinner, but no one needed to know that. Denise is expecting you at 8 sharp, Catherine said. She doesn't tolerate lateness. So I've been warned, I replied with a meaningful glance at my father. After dinner, Elena and I escaped to the terrace while the others had coffee in the drawing room. The night air was cool, a welcome respite from the hothouse atmosphere inside. Your family is exhausting, Elena said, leaning against the stone balustrade. They're not usually this bad, I said, then reconsidered. Actually, they're exactly this bad, but usually it's just directed at me. Lucky me, sharing the spotlight. She smiled faintly. You handled it well, better than I would have in your position. She shrugged. I've had practice being underestimated. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, looking out over the darkened gardens. Thank you, she said suddenly, for what you said in there about me looking beautiful. You didn't have to do that. It wasn't entirely selfless, I admitted. I wanted to see my mother's face. Elena laughed softly. Still, it was kind. I didn't expect kindness from you. The statement hung between use and honest assessment that should have offended me but didn't. I'm not usually kind, I acknowledged. But this situation is unusual. That it is. She glanced back toward the house. We should rejoin them before they send a search party. One more minute of peace, I pleaded dramatically, making her smile again. As we turned to go back inside, I impulsively offered her my arm. She hesitated, then took it, her hand light on my sleeve. For appearances, I explained. Of course, she agreed. For appearances. But something had shifted between USA tentative alliance forming in the face of my family's scrutiny. It wasn't friendship, certainly not romance, but perhaps a mutual respect beginning to take root. When we finally left the main house, my father walked us to the door. Remember, Ethan, 8 o'clock sharp tomorrow. He handed me a plain brown envelope. Your first week's salary in advance. Budget accordingly. The envelope felt insultingly light in my hand, the equivalent of what I used to spend on a single night out in the city. Good night, Father, I said stiffly. The drive back to the guest house was quiet, both of us processing the evening. Does he really think this will work? I finally asked. That a year of playing poor will fundamentally change who I am. Elena considered the question. I don't think it's about playing poor. I think it's about responsibility, consequences, seeing the world without the buffer of unlimited money. And you, what do you think will happen? She looked at me directly. I think you'll either surprise everyone, including yourself, or you'll fail spectacularly and return to exactly who you were, but with a better story at cocktail parties. Her honesty was refreshing after an evening of veiled insults and double meanings. And which outcome are you betting on? I asked as we pulled up to the guest house. She unbuckled her seatbelt, her expression thoughtful. I haven't decided yet. Inside, we moved around each other awkwardly. The forced intimacy of cohabitation still new and uncomfortable. Elena disappeared into her bedroom while I stood in the kitchen, staring at the envelope my father had given me. I opened it, counting the bills with disbelief. This was supposed to last a week? A memory surfaced, Elena mentioning working 18-hour days and still struggling to afford health insurance for her siblings. The contrast with my indignation over a sum she would probably consider generous was stark and embarrassing. Later, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard soft sounds from Elena's room next door. It took me a moment to recognize it as crying muffled, as if she was trying to hide it. I sat up, uncertain what to do. Comfort her? Pretend I hadn't heard? We were strangers bound by a bizarre contract, not friends, certainly not real spouses. But the sound tugged at something unfamiliar in mean impulse to ease someone else's pain rather than focus on my own. Before I could decide, the crying stopped. Silence returned, broken only by the ticking of the bedside clock and my own troubled thoughts. Tomorrow, I would begin my sentence minimum wage work, budget living, the performance of humility my father demanded. A year stretched before me like an endless desert. But for the first time, I wondered if Elena had been right. Would this experience change me? And if so, into what? On our wedding night, she had looked at me and whispered, "I know I'm not what you wanted." In the darkness of the guest house, I finally admitted the truth to myself. I had no idea what I wanted, not really. I'd spent my life pursuing pleasures that left me empty, fighting against constraints that might have given my existence meaning, drifting without purpose, rebelling without cause. As sleep finally claimed me, one thought remained. Perhaps this punishment was actually an opportunity, not to win back my trust fund, but to discover who I might become without it. In the morning, Elena was already gone when I woke off to her diner job before dawn. A note on the counter reminded me of my 8 a.m. start time at the foundation and wished me luck. The simple courtesy surprised me. I couldn't remember the last time someone had wished me luck for anything. In my world, success was assumed. Failure unthinkable. I dressed in the bland clothes my father had provided, made coffee, and stood looking out the kitchen window at the misty morning. The guest house sat a quarter-mile from the main house, close enough to be monitored, but far enough to feel isolated. A perfect metaphor for my current position, still attached to my family, but stripped of all the privileges that had defined me. As I locked the door behind me, keys to the mundane Toyota in hand, a strange feeling overtook me. Not quite dread, not quite anticipation, but something in between. The beginning of something I couldn't yet name. I said nothing. I just nodded. But inside, something shattered. The carefully constructed reality I'd inhabited my entire life crumbled around me. Because what I did next, no one ever saw coming. If you enjoyed this dramatic first chapter, please like, comment, and share. Don't forget to subscribe to see what happens next in Chapter 2. Will Ethan escape his father's punishment? Or will he discover something unexpected about himself and his new wife? The shocking twist is coming, Reign Tentar B. My father forced me to marry a beggar as punishment. Chapter 2. The Revelation. The first week was hell. I showed up at the outreach center in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, only to spend 8 hours sorting donated clothing that reeked of mothballs and desperation. My supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Denise, who clearly had been briefed on my situation, showed no sympathy when I complained about the conditions. "Most of these items are going to people who sleep on sidewalk grates," she said flatly. "I think you'll survive the smell." That night, I discovered Elena crying silently in the bathroom, a crumpled letter in her hand. When I asked what was wrong, she tried to hide it. "It's nothing," she said, quickly wiping her eyes. I snatched the paper before she could protest. It was a deportation notice for her youngest brother. Despite my father's promises, the process was stalling. Legal complications, bureaucratic nightmares. "My father swore he would handle this," I said, feeling a strange surge of anger on her behalf. "Your father is trying," she replied, taking back the letter. "But some things can't be fixed with money alone." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of my own problems, but because I kept seeing Elena's face, the quiet desperation there. I'd spent my entire life treating problems as minor inconveniences my father's money could solve. This was different. The next morning, I made a call to the only person I knew who might help an old college classmate who now worked in immigration law. I'd once paid his gambling debts after a particularly wild weekend in Vegas. He owed me. You want me to expedite a deportation case? Do you have any idea how difficult that is? He asked incredulously. I don't care. Make it happen. Whatever it costs. It's not about money, Ethan. It's about... I know, but you work with these people every day. You must know someone who can help. There was a long pause. I might, but it's a favor I've been saving for something important. This is important, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Meanwhile, Helena and I barely saw each other. She left before dawn for her shift at the diner and returned late from her night cleaning job. On the rare occasions we were both at the guest house, conversation was minimal and strained. She never complained, never raised her voice, just moved through her exhausting routine with quiet determination. I, on the other hand, raged against my circumstances. I made snide comments about the prison my father had constructed. I deliberately performed poorly at work. I was determined to show everyone that this experiment would fail, that I couldn't be molded into whatever version of a son my father wanted. On the 10th day, I decided to act. I'd been carefully observing the security routines at the estate, noting when the guards changed shifts and which areas of the perimeter were less closely monitored. I had also been withdrawing the maximum daily amount from my remaining account, the only one my father hadn't frozen, which contained my living allowance for the month. It wasn't much by my standards, but it would be enough for a cheap car and a few weeks' expenses while I figured out my next move. I had connections my father didn't know about former classmates who owed me favors, a few dubious business contacts who operated outside my family's sphere of influence. I packed a bag while Elena was at work, wrote a terse note saying simply, "This isn't working, don't look for me," and waited for nightfall. But as I sat there, my phone rang. It was my immigration lawyer friend. "It's done," he said, sounding exhausted. "Your brother-in-law's case has been flagged for review. The deportation is suspended pending further investigation. How did you?" "Don't ask. I called in every favor I had. You now owe me your firstborn child." I laughed, feeling an unfamiliar lightness. "Thank you. Seriously." As I hung up, I stared at my packed bag, suddenly uncertain. Before I could reconsider, another call came. A number I didn't recognize. "Your father collapsed at the office. Mount Sinai Hospital. Critical condition." My first thought was that it was a trap me father, testing whether I'd abandon my wife at the first opportunity. I ignored it, continuing to watch the clock. 10 minutes later, my brother called. "Ethan, where are you? Dad's had a massive heart attack. It's bad, really bad." The genuine fear in his voice couldn't be faked. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "I'm at the guest house. What happened?" "Just get to Mount Sinai now. They're prepping him for surgery, but he didn't finish the sentence." I grabbed my car keys, hesitating only briefly before leaving my packed bag behind. The hospital corridors were a blur as I followed the directions to the cardiac unit. My mother sat rigidly in a waiting room chair, her normally perfect appearance disheveled. My sister paced near a window, phone pressed to her ear, likely updating other family members. My brother stood talking with a doctor, his face grave. "What's going on?" I demanded. My mother looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "They don't know if he'll survive the surgery. His heart. It was worse than anyone knew. He's been hiding it for months." "Months?" I repeated stupidly. "He never said anything." "Of course he didn't," my sister said, joining us. "When has father ever admitted weakness?" We waited in tense silence for hours. I found myself thinking of strange, Disconnected moments, my father teaching me to swim, his rare proud smile when I graduated high school, his face just days ago when he introduced Elena. Had there been signs of his illness I'd been too self-absorbed to notice? Shortly after midnight, my phone buzzed again. Elena, I heard about your father. Is there anything I can do? I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. I hadn't even thought to tell her where I was going. How did you know? I texted back. Maria called me. I can come to the hospital if you need someone there. The offer was unexpected. Why would she care? What did my father's health mean to her beyond the arrangements he'd made for her family? Before I could respond, the surgeon appeared, still in scrubs. We all stood, bracing for the worst. He's in recovery, the doctor said, and my mother let out a sob of relief. But I need to be honest with you all. The damage was extensive. If he survives the next 48 hours, and that's significant if he'll need a heart transplant. Soon. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Heart transplants meant waiting lists, meant time running out, meant money might not be enough to save him. He's on the National Registry already, the doctor continued, but given his age and condition, he didn't need to finish. My father was 68, not the ideal candidate. There has to be something, my brother said, his confident business voice cracking slightly. Private clinics, experimental procedures, something. The doctor's expression was sympathetic but firm. Mr. Ellison's condition is too severe for experimental approaches. What he needs is a new heart, and those are in short supply. As my siblings peppered the doctor with questions, a nurse approached with a clipboard. We found this in his personal effects, she said, handing me an envelope. He asked that it be given to his children if things went poorly. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter and several pages of legal documents. If you're reading this, I read silently, then I've either died or come close enough to warrant giving you this letter. There are things you should know. What followed was a confession of sorts. My father had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition 6 months earlier. Given a prognosis of perhaps a year without surgical intervention, he had begun putting his affairs in order, including dealing with what he called his greatest failure. I've been too hard on all of you, I continued reading, my hands shaking. Pushing you to achieve, to be perfect. With Ethan, I went too far in the other direction, giving him everything without requiring anything in return. This recent arrangement was not, as he believes, a punishment, but my desperate attempt to help him find purpose before I'm gone. I felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath me. Elena Morales came to my attention through Catherine's foundation. Her determination to care for her siblings despite impossible odds reminded me of myself at her age. In her, I saw what Ethan needs most, someone who understands that life has real stakes, that our actions matter, that family is worth fighting for. My sister noticed my distress and reached for my hand, but I pulled away, needing to finish reading alone. The marriage may be a fiction, a desperate father's last attempt to save his son, but the lesson is real. Ethan, if you're reading this, know that I didn't do this to hurt you or control you. I did it because I'm running out of time to see you become the man I know you can be. The letter continued with instructions about the business, apologies for his absence, and love for each of us. But I barely heard the rest. My mind was fixed on that single revelation. My father was dying, and his punishment had been a final, desperate attempt to help me. I left the hospital in a daze, driving aimlessly through the city streets until I found myself parked outside a 24-hour diner in a neighborhood I'd never have visited in my previous life. Through the window, I could see Elena, dressed in a blue uniform, refilling coffee cups with practiced efficiency. Her face showed exhaustion but no self-pity as she smiled at an elderly customer. I sat watching her for nearly an hour, seeing her for the first time. When her shift ended, I was waiting outside. The surprise on her face quickly turned to concern. "Your father, is he?" "He survived the surgery," I said. "But it's serious. He's been sick for months." She nodded, pulling her coat tighter against the pre-dawn chill. "I'm sorry. Did you know?" I asked suddenly. "About his condition? About why he really arranged this?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not the heart condition, but he told me his reasons weren't what they seemed. He said you had potential that was being wasted, and that sometimes people need to be pushed into the cold to find their own warmth." I laughed hollowly. Sounds like him, always with the metaphors. We stood in awkward silence for a moment. "I was going to leave tonight," I finally admitted. "I had a bag packed. I was going to run away from this whole situation." Instead of the judgment I expected, she simply nodded. "I know. You knew? I cleaned the guest house too, remember? I saw the bag, the cash. I'm not stupid, Ethan." Her directness was disarming. "So why didn't you say anything? Tell my father?" "Because it wasn't my place. You're an adult. If this arrangement isn't what you want, you have the right to leave." She looked at me steadily. "Is that still your plan, now that you know why your father did this?" The question hung between us in the cold morning air. I thought about my father in that hospital bed, about the wasted years of my life, about this woman who worked 3 jobs without complaint while I'd never worked a single day before this month. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I'll drive you home now if you want. You must be exhausted." Something changed between us after that night. We didn't suddenly become lovers or even friends, but a kind of respectful truce emerged. I continued working at the outreach center, no longer deliberately sabotaging my efforts. Elena showed me how to cook simple meals, laughing gently at my ineptitude with basic kitchen tools. "How have you survived this long?" she asked one evening as I struggled to chop an onion. "Room service," I replied, and her laughter-reel, unguarded laughter struck me as the most authentic sound I'd heard in years. My father's condition worsened. The doctors moved him higher on the transplant list, but the prognosis remained grim. I visited him daily, watching his once powerful frame grow thinner, his voice weaker. During one visit, he gripped my hand with surprising strength. "The business," he whispered. "Your brother can't handle it alone." "I don't know anything about real estate," I said, panic rising. "I barely passed my business classes." "You know more than you think." His eyes locked onto mine. "You've always had instincts. You just never used them for anything worthwhile." At home that night, I mentioned the conversation to Elena. To my surprise, she didn't offer empty reassurances. "He's right," she said, matter-of-factly. "You're smarter than you pretend to be. I've seen you reading your father's business journals when you think I'm not looking." I stared at her, caught between embarrassment and a strange sort of pleasure at being seen. "I wouldn't even know where to start," I admitted. "Maybe that's the point," she said. "To start somewhere. Anywhere." The next day, I called my brother and asked him to bring some of the company's current projects to the hospital. He looked surprised, but returned that evening with a stack of folders. "These are the most urgent," he said, dark circles under his eyes betraying his exhaustion. "But don't worry about it. I've got it covered." "I want to help," I said, taking the folders. "Really help, not just pretend to." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay. The Franklin Street development is stalling. Zoning issues, community opposition. It's a mess." I spent that night reading through the documentation, shocked to discover I actually understood most of it. Years of listening to my father's business calls, of observing his negotiations, had taught me more than I realized. The next morning, I visited the Franklin Street site. It was a run-down block in a transitioning neighborhood, exactly the kind of place my father specialized in transforming. But instead of his usual luxury condo approach, I noticed something my brother had missed. The community didn't need another high-end development. They needed affordable housing, local businesses, spaces for the existing culture to thrive alongside new growth. I spent the day talking to neighborhood residents, local business owners, community organizers. By evening, I had the beginnings of a new proposal loan that would include mixed-income housing, spaces for local artisans, and community areas. When I presented it to my brother, he looked skeptical. Social responsibility projects are Catherine's department, not ours. It's not charity, I argued. It's smart business. The community opposition disappears. We get tax incentives for the affordable units, and the commercial spaces will have built-in customers who actually live there. The profit margin is smaller per unit, but the project moves forward instead of stalling. He stared at me for a long moment. Who are you? And what have you done with my brother? I laughed. Maybe Father's crazy plan is working after all. The Franklin Street proposal gained traction. City officials who had been blocking the project suddenly became allies. Community leaders who had organized protests now showed up for planning meetings. My father, watching from his hospital bed, seemed both surprised and quietly proud. "I didn't think you had it in you," he admitted during a rare moment of lucidity between pain medications. "Neither did I replied honestly. Meanwhile, Elena's brother's case had been fully resolved thanks to my lawyer friend's intervention. The night we received the final confirmation, Elena broke down in tears of relief. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her composure finally cracking. "You don't have to thank me," I said awkwardly. "It's what family does, right?" She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Is that what we are now? Family?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. The hospital. My father had taken a turn for the worse. We rushed to Mount Sinai, finding my mother and siblings already there. The doctor's expression told us everything we needed to know. "We've done everything we can," he said gently. "Without a transplant in the next 24 hours. Elena squeezed my hand as the reality hit me. The father I'd spent years resenting, then weeks finally getting to know, was slipping away. That night, as we kept vigil in the hospital waiting room, an idea took hold. A desperate, possibly insane idea. "I need to make some calls," I told Elena, stepping into the hallway. My immigration lawyer friend knew people, people who knew people, people who operated in gray areas for the right price. I had one asset left, a vintage watch collection my father had never known about, kept in a safe deposit box under a different name, worth 7 figures to the right buyer. "What you're asking," my friend said quietly over the phone, "crosses lines I'm not comfortable with. It's not what you think," I insisted. "I'm not trying to buy an organ on the black market. I'm trying to expedite a legitimate transplant. There are private clinics in other countries that can legally—" "It's still not how the system works, Ethan. My father is dying." There was a long silence. "I'll make some calls, but I'm not promising anything." I returned to the waiting room, avoiding Elena's questioning gaze. Hours passed. My father's condition continued to deteriorate. Just before dawn, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. "There's a clinic in Switzerland," a voice said without preamble. "They have a donor match from a private European registry. But the cost—" "I don't care about the cost. We're talking 8 figures, Ethan. Plus arrangements that need to happen within hours. Make it happen." I hung up and immediately pulled my brother aside, explaining the situation in hurried whispers. "This is insane," he said. "Possibly illegal." "It's not illegal," I insisted. "Just aggressively facilitated. Everything is legitimate once we get him there." "And how do we pay for it?" "Father's assets are tied up in the company, and liquid cash of that magnitude would take days to access." "I have a way," I said. "But I need you to trust me." 2 hours later, a medical transport team arrived to prepare my father for the journey. My brother had pulled strings with the hospital administration while I liquidated my watch collection through a collector who didn't ask questions. As they were wheeling my father toward the elevator, his eyes flickered open, finding mine. "What's happening?" he asked weakly. I leaned close to his ear. "I'm saving your life, old man. Try not to die before I get the chance to show you I'm worth the trouble." The ghost of a smile touched his lips before his eyes closed again. The next 3 days were a blur of private jets, Swiss medical facilities, and tense waiting rooms. The operation was successful. My father had a new heart. The recovery would be long, but he had a chance now. A real chance. When he was stable enough to speak, he asked to see me alone. "How?" he asked simply, his voice barely audible. "I found a solution," I said. "That's what you taught us to do, isn't it? Find solutions where others see problems." He studied my face. "The watches. You sold the watches." I couldn't hide my surprise. "You knew about those?" "I've always known," he said with a weak chuckle that turned into a cough. "I let you keep them because it was the first thing you ever showed real passion for." We sat in silence for a moment. "You broke laws for me," he finally said. "It wasn't a question. I bent rules," I corrected. "For family. Something I learned recently." When we returned to Connecticut 2 weeks later, everything had changed. My father's brush with death had transformed him, softened the edges, made him more reflective. The business was thriving under my brother's leadership, with my Franklin Street project moving forward as the new model for the company's urban developments. But the most profound change was within me. I continued working at the outreach center, no longer because I had to, but because I wanted to. The people there had become important to me, their struggles, their triumphs, their simple human dignity in the face of adversity. One evening, I returned to the guest house to find Elena sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunset. "You're home early," I said, joining her. "I quit the night cleaning job," she replied. "Your father's assistant offered me a position at the Foundation Immigrant Advocacy Program. Part-time for now, with the option to finish my degree." "That's fantastic," I said, genuinely pleased for her. "You'll be brilliant at it." She smiled, looking out at the fading light. "I never thanked you properly for what you did for my brother, for your father. You don't need to thank me." "I know. But I want to." She turned to face me fully. "You're not who I thought you were, Ethan Ellison." "I'm not who I thought I was either," I admitted. We sat in comfortable silence, shoulders almost touching. After a while, she spoke again. "Our arrangement was for a year. We're only 2 months in." "I know. But things have changed, haven't they?" I nodded slowly. "Everything has changed." She took a deep breath. "I think we should talk about what happens next, what we both want." I looked at her, this woman who had entered my life as a punishment but had somehow become so much more. A partner, a friend, perhaps something else I wasn't yet ready to name. "What do you want, Elena?" I asked softly. She met my gaze steadily. "I want to stop pretending. Either way." "Meaning?" "Meaning we either make this real or we end it honorably. No more in between." The simplicity of her statement, the courage behind it, took my breath away. 6 months ago, I would have run from such directness, from any commitment that limited my freedom. No, the thought of ending what we had built, however unintentionally, felt like losing something precious. What would real look like? I asked carefully. I don't know exactly, she admitted. But it would start with truth, with choice, with both of us wanting to be here, not because of your father's manipulation or my siblings' needs, but because of who we are together. I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. It was the first truly intimate gesture between us, not for show, not for appearances, but because I needed the connection. I choose this, I said simply. I choose you. Her eyes widened slightly, searching my face for any hint of insincerity. Finding none, she squeezed my hand. We'll need new vows, she said with a small smile. Ones we actually mean this time. Later that night, as we sat together planning a future neither of us could have imagined months earlier, I thought about my father's desperate gambit. He had forced me to marry a beggar as punishment, hoping to teach me about real life. But what none of us had anticipated was that in finding herself, Elena was no longer a beggar. And in finding her, I was no longer the man who needed punishing. On our wedding night, she had looked at me and whispered, I know I'm not what you wanted. But she had no idea, and neither did my father. Because what I did next, choosing love over obligation, purpose over privilege, growth over stagnation, no one ever saw coming. Not even me. If you enjoyed this conclusion to our 2-part story, please like, comment, and share. Don't forget to subscribe for more emotional drama that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Reintentar Claude puede cometer errores. Por favor, verifique las respuestas.